I am officially ready to move on from week 3, and I am going to do that by looking at some of these buy low candidates because there are plenty of them before week 4 that we need to target in fantasy football. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support because we're doing everything we can to move on from last week and get us prepared for week 4. Now, the first guy right here, he's on here for a second straight week because in reality, he had his first touchdown of the year, but he still put up a really disappointing fantasy performance. Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. He comes out last week, has 11.8 fantasy points in a half PPR format, 5 catches, 33 yards, and a touchdown. That's his best game so far in fantasy football. Now, again, a lot of people, this is a guy that I said last week is a very frustrating fantasy player. And a lot of people feel this way because he's been like that the past 3 years. And again, I said this last week as well. What we've seen from Garrett Wilson so far has not been different than his first 2 years with bad quarterback play. So we're like, what's going on here? Is there a reason why this is happening? And is it going to get better? Now, here's my rationale and why I continue to say that Garrett Wilson's a must-buy right now in fantasy football. He is not a ghost. This guy is clearly the wide receiver 1 in New York. 11 targets week 1, 6 targets week 2, 9 targets week 3. This guy before week 2 was averaging 8.5 targets per game, and he actually raised that number up this week. So Garrett Wilson is not all of a sudden just some ghost in this New York Jets offense. It is just not being targeted. He is consistently being targeted, and if you've actually watched the Jets games, they're making a consistent effort. Every defense has played him to take him out of the game or minimize his impact as much as possible. That one touchdown he caught from Aaron Rodgers in week 3, that was so specifically designed for him. That was exactly what they did, and there's going to be games where Garrett Wilson just gets behind the defense a lot more, and Aaron Rodgers finds him. This one also has another factor. If you watched Aaron Rodgers in week 2, he still got it. Aaron Rodgers is going to be fine, and I think as the season goes, there's going to be more chemistry built between Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson because that is an ultimate problem here. Aaron Rodgers did miss a couple throws to Garrett Wilson in week 3, and I don't know if they were Aaron's fault. 2 of them, I think, that were just timing issues and maybe just not being on the same page with chemistry. I think that builds throughout the year. Garrett Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, that connection is going to grow. And I still think Garrett Wilson is someone I'm willing to send somebody like Amari Cooper off of a good week. Or maybe Rome Odunze plus off of a good week. Garrett Wilson, to me, is still a good buy low. Now, the next guy we're going through here, this has also been another really disappointing player. And I'm more encouraged this week than I have been all season with DJ Moore and the Chicago Bears offense here. Now, DJ Moore is in a situation here where he's coming into the season as the number 1 target, coming into a new deal here. So his production so far has not been very indicative and not been very friendly to his fantasy football draft price that it costs you to get him. DJ Moore has had 9 targets per game entering week 2 and only 7.9 fantasy points to show for it. Now, here's the thing with DJ Moore is, again, he's not a ghost in this offense. He had 10 targets again in week 3 versus the Indianapolis Colts and 11.2 fantasy points. Now, that was his best performance in fantasy so far. So again, this reminds me a little bit of Garrett Wilson. When you're being targeted at this level in an offense that I do think continues to evolve throughout the year, I want a piece of that because Caleb Williams I actually saw the most growth from him in week 3. He looked the best to me that he has all year, and it was encouraging for me to see that from Caleb Williams. Now, he also threw more than 50 passes in that game, so I'm not saying that that's going to continue to keep up. And Rome Odunze also had a good game as well. He actually outproduced DJ Moore in fantasy. But again, it just reminds me of Amari Cooper a little bit. Amari Cooper has a really good rebound week in week 3. He gets 2 touchdowns, he gets in the end zone, has a great fantasy week because the targets and the receptions were always going to come. The targets were always there, the receptions were going to come one week. We're going to see the same thing with DJ Moore, and he's not going to be a buy low. So the more chemistry that gets built between Caleb and DJ, the better Caleb gets. It's going to click all of a sudden because DJ Moore is not irrelevant right now. He is still very relevant in this offense, and that makes me want to trade for DJ Moore. Again, DJ Moore, since he's averaging this little fantasy points, this is someone I'm looking to trade like a Chuba Hubbard plus a decent wide receiver off of a good week. I'm also willing to trade somebody like a Jalen Waddle plus another running back too. I think DJ Moore eventually has a really good week in fantasy, and he's not a buy low in the next couple weeks. Now, the next guy we're going through here is another guy that people are starting to get irritated with in fantasy football. Mike Evans. Mike Evans all of a sudden becomes a buy low. 2 straight bad performances he's coming off of. In week 3, had 2.7 fantasy points. 3 targets, 2 receptions, 17 yards. Also had a down week last week. It wasn't as bad as this one. But it's so funny because Mike Evans is obviously such a big play threat. And you should know that when you draft Mike Evans, you're going to get big games like he did in week 1. And you're going to get some bad games like he's given you the past 2 weeks. Top on that, the fact that Chris Godwin looks like the more consistent target right now for Baker Mayfield in this new Tampa Bay offense here. So there's legitimate concerns that people can address with Mike Evans here. Now, the ultimate reason why I think Mike Evans is a good buy low candidate is because you can't take a week against Pat Surtain really and just say this is an indictment on Mike Evans the player. This is not an indictment on Mike Evans the player. He faced 2 really good matchups the last 2 weeks here, and he wasn't even bad in week 2. Just from a fantasy perspective, it's not what we've come to expect. So with Mike Evans here, I think the Bucs offense, just the way they got throttled in week 3, it's not indicative of what Mike Evans ultimately produces you. You know exactly what he can do. He can get you 25, 30-point games, and he's going to do it when the season is on the line for you and when it really counts. So Mike Evans, to me, that's exactly the type of guy I'm looking to send somebody like a Stephon Diggs for, or maybe even a DK Metcalf, and then try to get another running back too as well, because Mike Evans will come back and he will do really well in fantasy. It's just been a 2-game slump that he's on, but you know exactly how he can rebound here. Now, our next guy that we're talking about here is a guy that I was really big on all week. Obviously, it didn't work out in fantasy, but I'm still really big on the player. J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers, I think is a great buy low this week. So let's address, obviously, I told a lot of people to play J.K. Dobbins. That was a bad call. J.K. Dobbins did unfortunately struggle against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. 15 carries for 44 yards. That was his total in week 3. That's 2.9 yards per carry. That's a brutal week. And the problem with J.K. Dobbins, and what he will see, is that he's not getting a bunch of receptions. 3 targets, that was a decent amount for J.K. Dobbins this year. So it's not that we're going to see J.K. Dobbins' floor super high because he just doesn't see the targets. It's not an Alvin Kamara situation here where he's going to be able to be bust-proof in a way because he gets a lot of targets on top of the carries that he gets. If J.K. Dobbins isn't super efficient, he's going to have some bad weeks for you. And the reality was, this was a bad game for him. But here's the other reality that we need to remember when we're talking about J.K. Dobbins. He is running behind a great offensive line. Now, they were a little bit banged up, and Rashawn Slater did get injured in that game against the Steelers. I don't know what his status is as of the time of this filming. But Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater, if he's there, along with the rest of the offensive line, they're going to have much better weeks. The Steelers have been elite on defense this year. They've been elite. I have to say that. I have to admit it. The Steelers have been elite, and the J.K. Dobbins effect is going to move past the Steelers. Because what you have to remember is leading into this game, dude was averaging 9.9 yards per carry. That was never going to continue to keep up. But what will keep up is there will be better weeks here for J.K. Dobbins coming up against some weaker opponents. Now, they get the Chiefs here in week 4, so maybe if you want to, wait a week, see what J.K. Dobbins does. I just kind of think he's going to rebound again. Because the other thing to keep in mind here is that Gus Edwards was barely involved in this game versus the Steelers. J.K. Dobbins is starting to take over that running back field. So give me the guy who's the running back 1 in Los Angeles, a run-first team with a great offensive line. I want that guy off a really bad week. And there's already been people that were really uncertain about JK. Like, I was actually really surprised to see how many people were really uncertain on J.K. Dobbins heading into the week. And just kind of like, should I trade him high? Should I bench him this week? It's like, I said no to both of those. Don't bench him and don't trade him high. So now people are definitely going to be really concerned about J.K. Dobbins off a bad week. And if they should have sold him high. That little bit of doubt makes me want to trade for J.K. Dobbins and send somebody like a Devin Singletary his way. Because J.K. Dobbins is definitely on the better team with the better offensive line and the better future ahead of them. I love J.K. Dobbins this week. Now, the next guy makes his 2nd consecutive week, and I'm a little more deflated this week talking about Tyreek Hill, but I still do think he's a buy low. Tyreek Hill ends up having another really bad game. 5.5 fantasy points, and he only had 5 targets in this game. 3 catches for 40 yards. I'm a little deflated with Tyreek Hill. Now, the ultimate thing with Tyreek Hill and why I still think he's a buy in fantasy football right now is because with Tyreek Hill, he still is their best player offensively. And if you saw what happened to Devon Achane in week 2, he didn't get anything going. So they can't exactly rely on the run without Tua here. Now, Skylar Thompson ends up getting injured in this game. They had to go to Tim Boyle at quarterback here. So again, I don't know what the status is of Skylar Thompson and Tim Boyle, but it's not exactly a bad thing if they had to use Tim Boyle. Skylar Thompson is not very good at football. So with Tyreek Hill, this still just comes down to a belief for me that he's going to be really involved in this offense moving forward because they have no choice. They have no choice. The only way to get any offensive improvement and just move the ball down the field is to get Tyreek the ball. That's the only way to do it. They're figuring out ways to use him without Tua, and they're going to rush him more. They're going to get more plays at the line of scrimmage, and he will have better weeks. And again, the other part of this is that with Tyreek Hill, he was a top 3 draft pick, right? So the only thing his value could do was go down. That's the only thing it could do. It went down after Tua's injury, and it just went down even more after week 3. So Tyreek Hill, people are starting to really worry about here. I'm actually wondering at this point if I could get away with selling someone like a Jaden Reed for Tyreek Hill. I'm kind of wondering that. Maybe if I could sell a Devonta Smith for Tyreek Hill. Maybe if I could send somebody like a Stephon Diggs and maybe another running back like a Tony Pollard or a Brian Robinson for Tyreek Hill. Because at this point, again, you need to throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks because there are people who are panicking a little bit on Tyreek without Tua. And the reality is, since Tua's on the IR, there's going to be bad weeks with Tyreek Hill, but there is going to be good weeks with Tyreek Hill as well. And those are the weeks that I'm trying to go after here because he's a lower priced player than from where he was drafted at. Now, the last guy that we're going through today, this guy had a bad week. And I kind of had a feeling before game time, I was like, I probably shouldn't be as high on this player this week because James Conner had a really bad outing against the Detroit Lions. I really should have seen this one coming. He had 3 fantasy points, 9 carries, 17 yards. Gross. And a catch for 8 yards. Just a really nasty week. I really should have seen this one coming because Detroit's run defense is actually really good. Their pass defense is the weakness here. So Marvin Harrison Jr. ends up having another good game. Michael Wilson has a good game for the Arizona Cardinals. James Conner's left out of the party here. James Conner, 18.4 fantasy points per game is what he was averaging heading into week 2. He was averaging 4.6 yards per carry and averaging about 2.5 targets per game. So James Conner, I don't think this is going to be one that you're going to outright be able to buy him low and convince somebody that a bad week is going to be the referendum and the indictment on James Conner for the rest of the season. I don't think that that's really the case here. Really, the angle that you should be going after this one is if you do know somebody who is 0-3 now. If they're coming off another bad loss, they're 0-3 with James Conner, they may be just looking to improve their team overall. So this is a trade that I would try to attack somebody who's 0-3 with James Conner or 1-2, a really bad 1-2 with James Conner, and just needs more depth or more pieces on their entire offense because maybe they've suffered injuries. Maybe try to package together like a 3-part deal. Somebody with like a Devin Singletary replacement running back. Maybe a Jameson Williams or a Rashid Shaheed at the wide receiver position. And maybe a tight end like a Dallas Goedert off a good game. That's the move I'd be trying to do here because, again, I don't think that you're going to be able to convince anybody that this is really an indictment on James Conner's rest of season value, but I do think that if somebody is 0-3 or maybe even a shaky 1-2, that you could be able to attack this one at a good angle and maybe provide them some more value and some more availability at other key positions that they need in their fantasy football starting lineup and get James Conner on the cheaper. So let me know how your team did in week 3, and if you want to see the top waiver wire ads for this week before week 4, click on this video right here.